Here I am on the Solway coast near the lovely wee town of Craytown to explore one of the oldest archaeological sites in Galloway, Cairn Holy. It's a place with a mysterious past, long misremembered and misunderstood by locals and historians alike. Let's go and explore these two ancient and incredible cairns. Right, here we're at the top of the hill at Cairn Holy 2. There are two chambered cairns, not just one, named Cairn Holy 1 and Cairn Holy 2. Of the two, Cairn Holy 2 is actually the older construction, and it's further up the hillside than Cairn Holy 1. Chambered cairns like these can be found in Ireland, Wales and Scotland, but they are different to other cairns found further north in Scotland, suggesting that they may have been built either in a different time frame to others in Scotland or actually by different peoples. This is the smaller of the two cairns and is the tomb of King Galdus according to local tradition. It's 20 metres long by 12 metres wide. It has two chambers, but these are less than a metre high. It's entered through a narrow doorway at the top and only really has cramped space inside. Most of this is, of course, buried underneath the mound, with only the portal stones really still left of the outside of the cairn. King Galdus was credited with driving the Romans out of Galloway, as mentioned here. Now, most agree that the name Galdus is in fact a corruption of the name Cairngacus, a name given to a Celtic battle chief who supposedly defeated the Romans at the Battle of Mons Gropius. Cairngacus is credited as giving a rousing speech to the Celtic forces by Tacitus in a work that was quite possibly written to flatter his father-in-law, Agricola, meaning that Cairngacus possibly didn't even exist at all. Alistair Livingston, local historian and activist, looked into the origins of the association of Galdus and Galloway and discovered that Galdus, quite possibly like Cairngacus before him, was an invention. The first reference to Galdus that Alistair found was attributable to the 16th century writer Hector Boyce in his Historia Gentis Scotorum, History of the Scottish People. Boyce described Galdus at the Battle of Mons Gropius, then described what happened after the mighty king, as Boyce styled him, had driven out the Romans from Scotland. After describing Galdus's life, he describes his tomb in Galdia, which he tells us is now Galloway. Alistair then goes on to describe and cite versions that were subsequently transcribed into Galloway folklore. So, we can conclude that Galdus isn't buried here, simply because he never actually existed. Knowing this doesn't tell us much about who really is buried at Cairn Holy, but what we can begin to see is that there is a gap in our historic record here in Galloway. We don't seem to have any older traditions concerning the origins of clearly ancient sites like Cairn Holy, or even the lone standing stone at Dalaran in the Glen Kens. Why might they have been lost? Well, again, Alistair points us to the loss of Gaelic as the language of Galloway, because with it went the oral tradition that might have had an older, more historically rooted reason for these ancient sites. Gaelic was lost in Galloway with the coming of the Reformation, and so there was a void into which the likes of Boyce and his copiers could step into. Interestingly, the name Cairn Holy is derived from the Gaelic Cairn Holy, which means cairn of the stone tomb. This gives us a slightly different idea of what the cairns are, since the easy assumption would be to take the anglicised name at face value and consider this some kind of religious site, not just a burial site. But it doesn't really help us understand who's buried here. So instead we have to turn to archaeology to try and understand who might be buried here. The site encompasses two chambered cairns of the Clyde type, which must have been built during the Neolithic era. Galdus, of course, whether he was really Cairngacus or not, and regardless of whether either of them were real, were contemporaries of the Romans, who who were here in Galloway a little under 2,000 years ago. In fact, the cairns are between 2,000 and 4,000 years older than that, with construction at Cairn Holy 2 here having begun 6,000 years ago. That's more than 1,000 years before the Great Pyramids at Giza were built. Clyde-type chambered cairns are a kind of gallery grave, a tomb built from megaliths or large stones like these. Right, let's go and have a look at Cairn Holy 1 now. We've come down the hill a bit now to Cairn Holy 1, which is larger and more elaborate than Cairn Holy 2. It's 50 metres long by 15 metres wide, has a stone facade and a forecourt area large enough to accommodate a number of people. It has an outer chamber and a sealed inner chamber that would not have been accessible most of the time. There are cup and ring marked stones in the inner chamber, which are a form of Neolithic art etched into stone that is found widely throughout the world. Most of this mound at one point was actually covered in stone, but much of it has been used in local dry stone dikes and buildings over the years. Both sites were used for rituals including burial, but it is believed that Cairn Holy 1 was used for rituals for a larger number of participants. The space inside is more accommodating, but it is really this forecourt area and the facade that helps to form it that show us it was built for groups of people. The first major archaeological investigation of the sites here at Cairn Holy were done by Piggott and Powell in 1949, and they uncovered a wide range of little scraps of artefacts and fragments of axes to polished jadeite axe heads, pottery from a number of different sources, flint knives and polishing stones. Unfortunately, the cairns had been robbed long before Mr. Piggott and Mr. Powell got to study them, so there was little left for them to work with. Many of those items that were found are now in the National Antiquities Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. These finds were dated across a pretty long period of time, suggesting that these cairns were in active use from Neolithic times into the Bronze Age. The finds also point to their use not just as burial places for humans, but also as a place to dispose of material possessions. So what can the cairns themselves tell us about the people who built them and used Cairn Holy, and who buried their dead here? In her article for the TDGNHAS Transactions about Cairn Holy, Vicky Cummings gives us some ideas. She considers the views here significant both in understanding the placing of this site, but also as a clue as to who built it. From here you can look out across the Solway Firth all the way to the Isle of Man, and Clyde-type cairns all around the west coast of Scotland seem to be aligned with a view to the sea in the south. Perhaps then the people who built the cairns were looking out to lands they were deeply connected to the places they had migrated from to Galloway. With there being similarities in cairns along the Irish and Welsh coasts too, it shows they were a seafaring culture with connections across the Solway, the Irish Sea and up along the west coast of Scotland. The objects that Piggott and Powell found in their excavations corroborate this use of sea trade. The Neolithic era polished jadeite axe comes only from Switzerland, although the finding of a polishing stone means that the jadeite was probably worked here in Galloway. These were being brought into the British Isles 6,000 years ago, which coincides with the approximate age of the cairns. Among the pottery fragments found here were pieces of Peterborough ware, which is from the Neolithic period too. Other pottery fragments found here were from the Bronze Age beaker culture, which arrived in the British Isles about 4,400 years ago. This beaker culture largely replaced the people who had built the cairns and stone circles of the Neolithic era, so it replaced the people who built the cairns here at Cairn Holy too. The careful placing and building of the cairns here, and then the fact that these sites were in use for perhaps thousands of years, proves that these were actually important sites to the ancient natives of Galloway, even if there is no ancient mythical king actually buried here.